Welcome to the Firehouse Roundtable podcast, brought to you by the Ventura Fire Foundation. My name's Peter McKenzie. I'm one of the hosts. I'm a retired fire captain with the City of Ventura Fire Department.
And I'm Jason Kay. I'm an active fire captain also with the Ventura Fire Department.
And we are excited that you are going to spend some time with us at the kitchen table, learning about firehouse issues that we're trying to bring awareness to.
Thanks for joining us as we discuss the issues of being a firefighter, both on and off duty, and how it affects us.
Let's get right to it. All right, today we have Falone Serna on the podcast, who is the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at California Lutheran University. Welcome to the show, Falone.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you and looking forward to this conversation. But before we do that, why don't you give our listeners a quick bio on kind of who you are, what your expertise is, and kind of go from there.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I currently serve as the Dean of Undergraduate Admission at California Lutheran University here in Thousand Oaks, California. I've been in this role for a little bit over a year now, but I've worked in the field of higher education going on 20 years. I've been fortunate to have worked at some really great institutions. Prior to Cal Lutheran, I was the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Whittier College out in Whittier, California. Before that, Director of Admission at Pepperdine University over in Malibu. And my kids still give me grief for walking away from that view and that gig. Before that, I was up in Portland, Oregon at Reed College, which is a liberal arts college. It's actually famous for being the place where Steve Jobs dropped out of before he started Apple. So we're up there for a little while. And then prior to that, I had stops at Harvey Mudd College, which is one of the Claremont colleges out in the Inland Empire. And I started my career working at the University of La Verne, which is also out in the Inland Empire, a small private university, very similar to Cal Lutheran. And that's actually where I graduated from. So I kind of fell into the field. I was a football meathead, was a communications major. Unfortunately, somebody gave me a shot, and this ended up becoming a career. But outside of higher ed, I've had some cool jobs. I worked at K-Rock, the radio station, for those of us old enough to remember when radio was a thing. I worked at the LA Times for a little bit. So I've had an interesting career path, but I ultimately settled on working in higher ed when I got to Harvey Mudd, and I've been with the field ever since.
Awesome. Perfect. So it sounds like you know a thing or two about college admissions, which I think is part of the conversation today. I know that obviously our podcast kind of serves the fire service community and different stages in life that people go through. One being, your kids are getting older and you got to send them off to college and how to finance that. And I know that there's a lot of questions in my mind, and I think in a lot of people's mind who aren't from your world of higher education and know all the ins and outs of it, is like, how are we going to pay for this? I mean, firefighters they're not destitute and, poverty stricken, but they're also not, where they have, $1 million in the bank waiting to send it to a college. So, and there's a lot that goes along with that. You hear stories about, my kid's going to some Ivy League or USC school, and they're not paying as much as like what the stated, tuition cost is. And I think there's a lot of mystery wrapped up in that. And I think maybe it inhibits or limits people's choices and paths when it comes to helping their kids go to college. But that's just to kind of frame the conversation, is how we can kind of educate our listeners on how to look at these things, what to consider, tips, tricks, insider information that you might be able to shorten that learning curve and kind of get people on the path, should that be the path that they want to go on. So does that kind of frame what we're trying to accomplish today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I can help provide some insights into that. Like you said, it's a lot to unpack, and the pathway it's so different. Even if, I know a lot of folks in the department went to college themselves, and the process is so different now. So I definitely know there's a lot of, unpacking to do. So I'm happy to try to, make it a little bit more clear for everyone.
Yeah, awesome. And I know Jason's been down this path before me. My kids are approaching college age. And Jason, I think I remember having conversations with you about paying for college and what that looked like and financial aid. So feel free to chime in. I'm by no means the expert on this end, or meaning I haven't done it before. I know you have.
Yeah, the education you get from just getting thrown to the wolves most of the time as a parent is pretty crazy. Right. I have a connection to CLU. I grew up in Wildwood, right down the block from CLU, when it was still CLC. Yeah. And me and my friends would ride our bikes on the campus and up to the cross. And so that's pretty cool to have you on the show with us. My daughter went to the master's college. My brother went to Westmont. So those are all kind of similar educational experiences, as I think CLU lends itself to. I think it would be good to start the conversation where I started as a parent, which is when your kid applies, what are kind of the first steps and what should your expectations be? Specifically, when my daughter Tiffany applied and that was our first child, we had no idea kind of what to expect. I think the first part was the counseling office talks to you when you submit an application. And then there's this FAFSA thing. And all of a sudden, it's the price tag is not actually the price of the school. So maybe talk a little bit about that and get into that.
Yeah. Well, I would probably advise families that to start the process maybe even before the application is submitted, because there's so much to try to think through and unpack. Once you get to the application phase, we like to think that students and families have already started talking about, okay, well, this has to happen for this to work out financially, or, we're confident that if you get in, we're going to be here. So some of those conversations I think need to start earlier. Focusing on the price question and issue, that one is it's tough because, as you said, and as it was alluded to before, what people actually pay is often different than what we call the sticker price. And that has to do with the fact that when you get financial aid or when your kids are in scholarships, that's going to be all on their individual situation. There could be a case where two students wind up with a similar aid package, but really it's going to be dependent on the strength of your student's application to that college or university, and then whatever your financial situation is. I mean, if you do the FAFSA, if you decide not to do it, and then once you get all of those options, what do you accept? Are you going to accept student loans? Are you going to decline those? Is your student going to try to get a job on campus to pay? So there's a lot of things to consider. What I tell students to think about with respect to cost is, have that honest conversation with your parents. So, one thing that a lot of families do when they start this process is they say, well, I want my kids to make the decision. It's got to be their choice. They have to be into it. And I'm completely on board with that. I think most of us would agree. We kind of look down on the families that have the helicopter parents who are writing the essays for the kids. We definitely don't want that. But when it comes to cost, the parents have to be involved. The financial aid process, the parents have to be involved with it. The FAFSA that you referred to, the form that you did, that's not something that your students can do by themselves. They need your information. They're going to need your tax information. And, the parents are the ones paying the bills. So that's the part of the process where you definitely need to be prepared to be engaged with. And with the general search process, the students can lead that, but I do think it's worth having a conversation with the family, especially if you have children. My daughter's getting ready to start high school, and she's already talking about she doesn't want to be in Thousand Oaks or in California. And so we need to have a conversation as a family as far as like, okay, what does that mean? What's that really going to look like? And what are the realities? Again, even if you're in a position where you can pay something for college, stuff adds up. So you got to think about the cost, living in the residence halls, or if you're going to try to get an apartment, like all of these things have to factor in. And so I think that these conversations should happen before the application, because what happens is once a student applies, what if they get in, right? And if you haven't had conversations about cost and realities and all of that, you're really you could be setting yourself up for disappointment if what you are initially offered is just not going to make sense for you and your family. So I think you should come into that process eyes wide open. And I advise families, I think junior year of high school is when you should really start having these conversations about what's going to be reality for you and your family.
Right. So you said junior year of high school. So let's get a timeline going. I'm a junior in high school. Sure. What should I be doing? What should I expect? And then through the next 2 years, because I want to go to CLU, what would it take? And then kind of where do we go?
Yeah, so junior year, I advise students to start their search process, and that really begins with, certainly you want to think about cost, but let's take cost aside for a second. The first thing you want to think about is, okay, where do you want to be? Do you think you're going to want to stay close to home? Do you want to stay in the Western region, or do you want something completely different? You want to go on the East Coast? You want to go abroad? And so that's like a good starting point for the search. Where do you want to live? Then the next thing you want to think about, again, there's over, 2,000 4-year colleges and universities out there. Do you think you're going to want to go to a place like UCLA that's got, 20, 30,000 students, or do you want to go to a place like Cal Lutheran that's got about 2,500 undergraduates? So do you think you're going to do better in a bigger setting, a smaller setting? And both have their advantages. And so start looking up colleges. A great place to start. There's a website called College Futures where students can create a profile, put in some of their preferences and things that they like, and the website will give you some options to look into that might match what you think you're looking at. Certainly what you want to study as far as a major, that factors into it as well. Niche is another great website, NICHE. Some of you may be familiar using Niche if you're looking for neighborhoods to move in, or, it's a popular website, but it's also good for college search. So College Futures and Niche are two that I think are good starting points where if you don't know where you want to start, certainly some students already know, I want to go to USC. I've been wanting to go there since I was a little kid, and that's good. But if you really are starting from scratch, those are a couple of resources. And then sign up for their mailing list, in that way colleges will start communicating with you, telling you about upcoming events, things to look at. They'll send you some information so you can start doing your own research and really kind of narrowing that down. And so as you get through your junior year, I think ultimately the goal should be narrow down the list of schools that you're looking to apply to. These days, most students, I think, apply in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 schools. I think that's a healthy amount. You may hear some crazy stories about families and students applying for over 20. I think that's a bit much because, again, what happens if you get admitted to all 20? You really haven't made any decision. You want to try to make this as easy as possible. Start narrowing your list down. And then, the next step, and this is really important junior year, especially around spring break time or summer before senior year, start visiting campuses. That's really a big factor because you can get a lot from schools. And certainly with the pandemic and COVID, a lot of us have invested heavily in online resources for students to learn about our schools, videos and virtual tours and things like that. But really nothing beats the in-person experience and going and seeing a campus for yourself, talking to the students there. If you get a chance to connect with faculty, if you're a prospective athlete, talking to the coaches, you want to try to get that experience if you can. And I always tell students to really take advantage of being in California, because I mentioned before, one of the things you'll have to decide if you want to go to a big school or a small school. Where in Southern California, we've got a little bit of everything here. Even in our area here, you could go visit a place like UC Santa Barbara or Cal State Northridge that has thousands of students, and then you can go visit a Pepperdine or a Cal Lutheran that's got a more intimate setting. And so you can see, even if those are not schools that are on your list, you can at least see, okay, this is the kind of environment I'm looking for. This is the kind of atmosphere I'm looking for. Do I want the big sports? Do I want the small classes? And that'll start getting you narrowed down to a list of schools that you can start working with. And then at that point, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but, once you kind of get down to the list of schools that you're looking at, then you need to start thinking about, okay, when are the application deadlines? When do I need to start working on my application? Most students, I would say, start working on their applications summer of their junior year. That's when you start thinking about the essays you want to submit, start thinking about who you want to submit request letters of recommendation from. Once you have a list of schools, think about the different deadlines, because, if you apply to UCs, for example, they're all the same deadline. So if you're applying to UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego, UCLA, it's the same application. You just dictate which schools get that application. So that's straightforward. But then if you're applying to private schools, if you're looking at the Pepperdine, Loyola Marymount, Cal Lutheran, we'll all have different deadlines if you want to apply early, if you want to apply regular. And so however you organize that type of data and deadlines, do that for you. If it's a planner, I'm a spreadsheet guy, so I put everything on an Excel doc, if that works for you, but try to get organized. I would also say make sure if you don't have one, get an email address that's professional looking. We don't want, Starfire 316, your email should have your first and your last name for colleges to use, and that, that you'll check. And this may be an instance where if you're going to be a little overwhelmed because high school's busy, especially junior and senior year, you may want to get an email address that you allow one of your parents to have access to make sure they're checking and see that you're not missing any deadlines or things like that. So it's really about, junior year is about kind of setting the table, finding the schools that you're really interested in, really coming to grips with what you're interested in studying, and then start thinking about a game plan for applying. Because especially if you're going to apply to even 12 schools, it's a lot, and there's different applications. There's a Common App, there's a UC app, individual schools may have their own applications. And if you're looking for certain scholarships, you may have to have that. So you want to really get organized. And I just, waiting until the fall of your senior year is probably not the wisest if you want to not have a crazy stressed out. I know your podcast talks a lot about mental health and that type of thing. The college process should not be contributing to a lot of anxiety and stress. And I think just kind of going at it and planning ahead of time will go a long way in helping with that.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I think most things in life we do better if we're organized and plan ahead and kind of get ready for what's coming up. I know the college process, the application process is a lot. And the more schools you apply to, the more you need to write and, the more fees there are, because I think most applications have a fee associated with them. So as the Dean of Admissions, I want to go to CLU. What are you looking for?
At the core of every institution, we want to make sure that students are positioned to succeed and graduate. We're not just looking for, someone who's going to come in year one and do well. We're looking for future alumni. So we're trying to look for attributes and qualities that give us confidence that the student will be successful here, graduate and go on and do great things. That all starts with academics, of course. And, when you think about academics, it's a two-part thing that we look at. First off, is the student prepared for the rigors and the academic program that exists at our institution specifically? So that's kind of like the bottom line. Can the student pass freshman English? Is the student going to get through our curriculum and all of that? So that's the starting point. Then there's the competitiveness. Different schools have different demands and more applications and all of that. Cal Lutheran is a moderately selective institution. We typically admit around 70-75% of our applicants. So we admit the majority. And actually, it's funny. The majority of colleges and universities admit more than half of their students. Out of again, I mentioned 2,000 or so four-year colleges and universities, it's less than 200 institutions that admit fewer than 50%. And then when you're talking about like the Ivy League schools or even USC and these colleges that admit 10% or fewer of their applicants, we're only talking about 50 schools or so. But those are the institutions that tend to get a lot of attention because, there's a demand to go there. But that's the other thing you need to think about. If you are going to be applying to an institution that is competitive like that, you need to check to see if your academic record is in line with the typical students that they admit for you to even be in the game for that, so to speak. So, because a lot of colleges and universities, we all ask for essays and letters of recommendations, and sometimes you'll get to interview. But if you're not in the ballpark of like the range of academic statistics with your GPA, and if a school requires test scores, your chances of getting in are not great, even if you have a sparkling personality. And so that's something that I think. So again, so you have to be prepared for the school, but you have to be competitive as well. But beyond that, going back to what we're looking for in Cal Lutheran, as I mentioned, we're a smaller population, about 2,600 undergraduates, and the majority of our students live on campus. So we value students who are going to be good contributors to a learning environment and community. So we like to think about, what's the student going to be like in a lab group, or what are they going to be like in the residence halls? Is this someone that our students are going to want to be a part of? Because our students are active. We have very few students here whose existence is just come to school, take classes, and go home. Our students are engaged and involved, whether it's with athletics, clubs, the arts, student government. And so we feel that's a big part of our experience here. And so we want to bring in students who are going to contribute to our community in a positive way and be someone that we think will thrive here and, again, just be a great contributor to the community. And so we get that from we require essays, there's letters of recommendation. We try to get as much of a personality fit as we can when we're looking at students. And I think a lot of schools that are similar to Cal Lutheran in that vein, you would hear similar things from a Pepperdine, a Loyola Marymount, even like a USC that's a little bigger than us.
I got a question for you. Let's say little Johnny wants to be a school teacher. Does it make sense to try to go to Harvard or an Ivy League school? Or how do you reconcile career choice with college choice? And when do those things, talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
No, excellent question. And I think it comes to, I throw out the term a lot, the value proposition, because right now, especially coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people found people took different pivots and as far as career and making money. And, even before the pandemic, folks were starting to question the value of education because, again, as we know, I'm sure you all see with the fire department, I know it benefits in some instances for folks to have college degree, but you don't have to have a degree to do, get into certain careers and trades and you can make a great living. And so, when you think about what you're doing this for and what you're trying to get out of it, I think that's absolutely a fair question and one that I don't know that every institution has done a great job of it, but we've been put on notice. So I think a lot of us are trying to do our best to tie what we're doing in our classrooms and in our programs and how that relates to success for them career-wise and postgraduate. So what I would say is, a great way to do that is look into the programs and ask the questions, what are the alumni doing? What kind of, while a student is on campus, what kinds of connections do they make? How are we setting our students up for success? And so part of our thing at Cal Lutheran, when we talk with students about what they're looking to do, whether it's going into becoming a teacher, a coach, or getting into business with us, or we have a great sports management program or kinesiology, any of these fields, we try to make sure students are aware of not only the education that they're getting in the classroom, because that's certainly a big part of it, but what else are we offering? What other kind of real world experiences are we giving them? And so for example, at Cal Lutheran, all of our students are required to do what we call a real world experience. Typically that comes in the form of an internship or a job shadow, but it could also be a study abroad experience. Anything that puts what they're learning in the classroom into practice. And so what I would tell families, if a student is looking at a particular program, because that's the thing, believe it or not, most students don't know what they want to do when they're going to college. A lot of them are undecided. But if you do have a student who already knows, hey, I want to be an engineer, or again, I know I'm going to be a coach, look at the program and find out, okay, what's my experience going to be junior, senior year? Are you connected to school districts? Do you get people in the classrooms? If for business, what kind of internships do you offer? Do you have career fairs? What companies are recruiting your students? What kind of experiences are we getting? I think those are all fair and valid questions to ask. And that's how you can sort of assess the value. Certainly going to a place like Harvard or Stanford or USC, you're going to get a bigger kind of name recognition than you are the Cal Lutherans or where I went to school, University of Laverne. But that doesn't mean that some of these smaller institutions, again, I can tell you firsthand at Cal Lutheran, we've got people working for Fortune 500 companies and big organizations and all of that. And so, some of it, the name of the institution and the pipeline, that's helpful to a certain extent. But the example I always use is if you're looking to like take education out of it, if you're looking to get better physically, if you want to become a bodybuilder or get stronger, you can go join the fanciest gym in the world, right? Get the nicest 24-hour fitness with all the great equipment and the classes and all of that. But if you're not putting in the work, if you're only going in once a week for an hour, you're not going to look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson just because you signed up to join this fitness club. You have to put in the work. And college is very, very similar. Again, you've got a lot of success stories coming out of places like Harvard and Stanford and USC, but you have just as many people who come out of places like Cal Lutheran, Cal State Channel Islands, these other schools that don't have big of name, but people took advantage of the resources and opportunities offered there, and they made great careers. So some of it is the name of the school, but some of it is what you put into it. But it is fair to know whether or not the school is prepared to kind of foster or really support whatever your goals are. Again, it's on the flip side. I tell you, someone's looking at Cal Lutheran and they're dead set on being an engineer. We don't have an engineering program. I mean, you can become an engineer as like a physics major or a math major, graduate, and become a professional engineer, but it's not the same as going to an engineering school. So maybe we aren't the best fit for you for that. So that's where that question comes in.
Hi, I'm Austin Folk, an engineer with the Ventura City Fire Department. I'm also on the board of the Ventura Fire Foundation, an organization that supports firefighters and their families. The foundation produces this podcast as part of our mission. I work with the foundation because I was witness to the help that it was able to provide to my family. The foundation needs your help. First, please subscribe and rate this podcast on your podcast platform. This helps us get a higher ranking and more visibility for the show. Second, if you support the podcast and the foundation's work, please consider donating. Every dollar helps us support firefighters and their families. There's a link in the show notes, or you can donate through the website at www.venturafirefoundation.org. Thank you for listening.
Let's talk about money, because I think from our perspective, our listeners are they're essentially going to be parents, and they're concerned about, how much student loans their kids are going to be encumbered with when they come out of college. What's the situation with scholarships and grants? Like, I know personally, like, my concern is, how are we going to pay for all this? I have 3 kids that are approaching ages that, may be going to college. That's the biggest concern in my mind, the most pressing one. And if you take out the whole, the value proposition conversation out of it and talk about just how are we going to afford this? What does I don't know if you can share, but like, what is the annual tuition at Cal Lutheran, just for the sake of our conversation?
And I'm happy to break this down. And I think I'm probably good because I gave my career history, as far as all the institutions I've worked at, and I've only worked for private institutions. And so we all have heavy price tags. I mean, these days in California, I don't think you're going to find an institution that's less than $45,000 a year for tuition. And then if your students are living on campus, that's usually going to be another $10,000 to $15,000 a year. And so that's just direct costs, right? That's not factoring in things like books or other, indirect costs that a student may have just living, we're talking heavy price tags here. But we always tell families that sticker price should not be the primary deterrent. Now, be aware, if you're looking at a place with a heavy price tag, if you're not going to be able to cut a check for $65,000 every year, be honest with, hey, in order for us to make this work, it's going to have to, the cost is going to have to come down to this number and this figure. And I think that could be realistic depending on your situation. The Cal States and UCs, I can't remember offhand what they cost, but the public schools are certainly not as expensive. The UCs aren't quite the deal that they used to be, but I want to say they're around $30,000 a year, and the Cal States are going to be even a little less than that. And so, being aware of the sticker price and all that, I tell families the way I think of it is, and the way I'm probably going to handle it with my own children is, you should have, oftentimes when people think about the college process and when they think about risk, they think about it from an admission standpoint. Like, okay, I'm going to apply to, USC and they only admit, 15%. So that's a reach school for me and I'm going to get some safer places. But I also think you should be thinking of it in terms of financial. So like, I'm going to apply to Cal Lutheran, but even if I get in, we're only going to be able to go there if we can get our costs down to like $10,000 a year or whatever it is. So that's the first way to think about it. I guess the confusing part becomes though, and this is, to answer your question, everyone's cost ultimately is different. People in my field don't like to make this comparison, but the best comparison that you can probably make is it's like buying a car, right? You see whatever the price is on that lot. And the difference is you don't really negotiate for a cost of college the same way you might do a car, but it's a similar thing. Two people can walk on a lot, be looking at two cars that cost the same amount, and one person may have paid this and the other person may have paid that based on a variety of factors. And that's similar to colleges and universities. And so one of the things that you were going to want to do, I mentioned earlier, when you look into and you're doing your research on institutions, what majors do they offer? What are the application deadlines? Find out what scholarship opportunities they offer. That's definitely a fair question. So for example, at Cal Lutheran, I can tell you every student who's admitted is automatically considered for a scholarship. This year it ranged from $15,000 all the way up to $32,000 a year. And so again, depending on what you qualify for, now that's a much different conversation. You see the $49,000 price tag, but if your student qualifies for a $25,000 scholarship, okay, now we're talking a little bit. This makes a little bit more sense to me. All right. Mm-hmm. And then you have the need-based financial aid. And earlier, Jason brought up the FAFSA form. And that's something that you're going to want to do. That's completely, again, that's out of the colleges and universities' hands. So the FAFSA is a form that basically every institution is going to look at to consider you for federal and state financial aid. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So you fill it out, and it's so I just got to say the FAFSA is actually making some major changes this year. There was a call by the administration, the feds, to simplify the form. So the old form, I think, had over 100 questions for you to answer. As of January 1, the updated form will only have 36 questions. And so it'd be much simpler to complete. And then you have to put your tax information on there. There's a retrieval tool that'll be part of the FAFSA that will automatically update your tax return. And it goes off of your return from 2 years prior. So the students who are applying for entry for fall 24, the financial aid information we'll be basing financial offers on will be from 22 year. So it's 2 years back. So
gotcha. Let me pause you right there, because I want to just ask Jason a quick question, because I'm sure he went through the FAFSA thing, and you probably are representative of your average fireman.
Yeah, sure.
Did you get any love from FAFSA? Did you get some, or what did that look like?
So it's interesting you're bringing this up, because
your personal financial info.
I can probably talk to a bunch of what Falone is saying from a personal experience, having gone through all of this stuff. The first thing is the FAFSA comes, and back when I took it, it was a huge packet. Like you said, it was 100 questions, but each question was like, give me your last 2 years of tax returns. So one question is like a day. Some of them are, you got to find this stuff and submit it and do emails, forms, and all this stuff. What we ended up doing was hiring a company to help us with the FAFSA. And they said that would bring our costs, because they had a bunch of the little secret answers that would bring the cost of the college down. And I'll tell you right now, it was a complete waste of my money. I don't know how Falone feels about those companies that offer that kind of stuff, but we went to a seminar as a family, and they basically did the exact same thing that we would have for a few $1,000s they charged us. And we didn't get any benefit out of it.
I was a little nervous on how you're going to answer that question, because I always listen to what Jason just said. So continue. But yeah, no, I would walk away from those kinds of services.
So another thing that we realized when Tiffany went to a private school, very much like CLU, is the sticker price was pretty close, I think, to what CLU's was. And it is nowhere even close to that, what you end up paying in the end. So don't look at the sticker price and then say, we can't afford to go to that school. Another huge factor was that those private schools, they guarantee, and correct me if I'm wrong with CLU, Falone, but you're out in 4 years with a degree, where most of the UCs do not say 4 years, and most of the time you end up doing 5. So you have to calculate on
5-6 years.
Another base price year on top of that a lot of times, and it's longer for an education. So it's a ton of education for the parents as well as the person getting into the college. And I think this discussion hopefully will lend itself to more guys hanging out at the kitchen table going, who's been through this and what do I have to expect as well?
Mm-hmm.
I like this. So you had a price tag, call it $50K, and say you paid $20K. Or I don't know if you're open to sharing what
that's
the
fairly
actual
close.
price tag was.
Yeah.
But, okay. So how much of that, like, you didn't get shut down on the FAFSA process because of your firefighter income, or how much of that did they contribute towards?
I can give you some specifics, but like Falone is referring to, you do the FAFSA, and then the school comes back to you depending on what your GPA is and depending on what you can afford. And Tiffany had pretty good grades. I think she had like a 3.75. They automatically took $6,000 off the top after her scholarships and grants and all that stuff, because you have good grades. They give you more money off. Then Tiffany got a job on campus. So they directly, I think it was even pre-tax, put that money towards her tuition and took that off of hers. And then personally, what I did was I had Tiffany, and hopefully Falone will get into some of this, but you get 3 loans when you go to college. You get subsidized, unsubsidized, and private loans. So Tiffany took on the subsidized loans, which you can defer till after college and even further without interest most of the time. And then the unsubsidized and the private we took on, which ended up being, Tiffany ended up graduating with what we called basically a car payment. So when she graduated, it was about the cost of getting a car for her. So she kind of drove a beater, and it was worth it to her because we had the discussions beforehand that instead of getting, one of the nice, cool cars when you're 20, 23 or 24, you have this college education. And then Steph and I ended up taking on the rest of the loans. And ultimately, the way we paid that off is we did 5 years of, I don't know if people will like this one, but we did 5 years of our complete tax return. We paid off her school, and I stopped giving to my 457 deferred comp for 5 years. And then in 5 years, we paid her whole school off without basically a huge change in our financial situation at home. And we were able to take care of that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, gosh, Jason, you said so much, and I'm glad. That's why I always like having parents who've gone through the process, because you're reminding me of a lot of, like, I think really critical points. First being, Peter, you kept asking about, like, okay, what are you getting from FAFSA and all that? So the thing with FAFSA is, kind of up front, you'll have an idea, and most of the firefighters, especially who are going to have college-age children, you guys all make great livings. You're not going to get a lot of federal and state aid with the FAFSA, right? Like there are some great, there's a great state grant program that the state has. There's Pell Grant and all of that, but that really benefits, the lower income, and a lot of times the middle class and upper middle class families get squeezed out a bit. So you may already be aware that you're not going to get much federal aid. You'll get some loans offered to you, which I'll talk about loans in a moment. But the thing is, what colleges and universities do with that information, so we have our scholarships, which usually are going to be based heavily on, like, your students' grades and whatever other achievements they have. So that's scholarship. But a lot of institutions, Cal Lutheran being one of them, will also look at what your FAFSA results are. And we have our own need-based grants that we award to students. So we do have, grants that we award to some middle income families and all of that. And we're constantly trying to, like, come up with ways to make sure we support those families as well, because we know they're not going to get a lot of support from the federal government or the state government. So that's something, and unfortunately, and this is a tricky part, and I tell families, there's no way for us to be able to tell you that ahead of time. So that's why it's so key that Jason said, do not let the sticker price scare you. What I tell families is, I think the first part, you should be aware of money, because like I said, you should have some schools in mind that, hey, if we don't get a dime, we'll still be able to make this work and you'll have a place to go to college. But for the other schools, you may need to wait and see. I say, first worry about getting admitted to the school, Because what happens is once you're admitted, about a week or two after, then you'll get your financial offer. Then you can make the money decision. At that point, you can see,
Gotcha.
okay, this is what we're facing. This is what we're looking at. Hey, we'll have to take out this loan here. We may not have to take out loan here. You got to get a job here. That's when you have that conversation. In most places, you have until May 1 to decide. You'll get your information January, February. So you can make your choice there. So there's that. And then the last thing, if I could just really quickly talk about the loans, again, every family, we offer students loans, and we offer the Parent Plus loan. Everyone's, stomach for borrowing, that's going to be on you. But I just have to say, unfortunately, a lot of what we hear in the media, we hear these horror stories, and I don't mean to trivialize them, about students getting saddled with hundreds and thousands of dollars of debt. And what I would tell you is that, for the most part, for, your regular 4-year undergraduate experience, that's usually not the students that are taking on the debt like that. I mean, again, I've worked at 6 different private schools. At every one, the average indebtedness was about $25,000 after 4 years. Another great point about what Jason says, you do finish in 4 years at a private school too, which is not only like thinking about paying extra tuition, but loss of income. Our students are getting to work after 4 years. They're not waiting until 6 years. They're not deferring their career start time. But the thing is, we have a cap on how much we can let a student borrow. So that's the other thing. Like first year students can't take out more than $5,500 for that first year of college at a private school. It's a little less for the public. So don't be afraid of loans. Think of it like the way Jason, I love the way you put that, it's like, the first car money, and I think it's a reasonable amount. So those are all great points. And like you said, if more guys get to talking about their experiences, that's the kind of education that needs to come out, not what some slick person is trying to tell you to get you to let them complete their FAFSA for you.
What is behind the media hype about colleges are the enemy and they're saddling kids with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loan? Like, where's that coming from? What's behind that?
Yeah, a lot of it, the for-profit schools, because they don't offer grants and scholarships, and so a lot of and honestly, again, it's mostly like going to be like your adult learners or people who are coming back to complete their education, and nothing against the University of Phoenixes of the world, but it's just a different business model, and those are the students you hear. I will say though, a lot of it does come from graduate school. Now that's a completely different discussion, because graduate schools don't have, some of them will have like your fellowships and things like that to pay, but a lot of people who are going to law school or getting a master's or a doctorate, a lot of them do have to borrow. And so that's where a lot of that student debt lives, is with the graduate degrees. And again, I think if you're looking for, and I don't work in grad admission, but when you're looking at those options, that is where you do the cost benefit analysis. If you're going to have to borrow $80,000 to get your med school degree, but what your salary is going to be as a doctor, you got to think of it in that way. But that's where a lot of the debt comes from. But on the undergraduate side, again, at least at the schools I've been at, we're not saddling students with that much debt. And I would actually tell you, I guess there are some instances where I've seen parents and families really go out and borrow and take out private loans. I don't know that I would advise, as great as I think Cal Lutheran is, if someone's got to borrow, $20,000 a year to go to Cal Lutheran, I might say you should probably look at another school for a better option. And so hopefully a lot of places are being honest and upfront about that. But, it's a tough market right now out of pandemics, and maybe folks are not giving that kind of advice. But I think most financial aid offices and institutions are coaching up and advising students and families to borrow responsibly. I don't think an undergraduate degree is worth going into 6 figures of debt. I don't think anywhere, even if you're saying Harvard. So,
follow-up question. So we went to this college fair thing for my oldest daughter, and it was mainly a lot of the UC and CSU schools and some privates. And the general flavor that I got from the people sitting on the other side of those desks was, and I'm interested in your perspective, and this is, a layman's interpretation, was that a lot of the admissions were down, and a lot of the schools that she was interested in were basically telling us, just apply. You're going to get in. Yeah. It's not going to be a problem. Is that the state of like college admissions, or what? Speak to that if you can.
Yeah, I would say yes. So there are two things working. Certainly, again, the pandemic had a big impact on college going on a number of different areas. I'll try to be brief here, but, looking at a place like Cal Lutheran, we lost a lot of enrollment coming out of the pandemic because, when people are looking at a place like Cal Lutheran with our price tag, even if you're not paying full sticker, our experience is the in-person, personable, like people aren't looking at Cal Lutheran for Zoom school. So, when we were closed and all that just kind of shut down our enrollment. So a lot of us are looking to kind of rebuild that. We've been fortunate the last couple of years. Our class sizes are more back to normal, but we're still kind of building that back up. The other part of it too is the impact that the pandemic had on the students' high school experience. A lot of them missed some key moments. They weren't getting the same guidance and advice. And I feel like students have been, and I think we're going to be dealing with this for another couple of years. These students who miss key moments because of the pandemic. I think they're still trying to figure things out. And, my high school colleagues would tell you developmentally, like this last class that just came up who's starting high school, these seniors, it's kind of like working with sophomores and juniors who are seniors, so they've been a little slow to develop. So I think we're kind of going through that. And so most institutions are what you call tuition dependent, meaning that's where we get our revenue from, tuition dollars and butts and seats, pardon the crassness there. And so when you have a couple of years where you're down in enrollment, the powers that be are going to tell us, hey, you need to bring in as many students as you can. And so, it's not, obviously we'll still continue because again, we're not trying to set students up for failure. You need to have more than a warm body to get in here, but we're a lot more affirmative in bringing in students because we're trying to rebound our enrollment. I mentioned Cal Lutheran's at about 2,500 undergrads. We're typically at 2,800. And so it takes a while to build that back up. So I would say with the few exceptions, that is the case for a lot of places.
So with the laws of supply and demand, do you see tuition prices coming down to generate more applications? Or
if it weren't for inflation and all of that, maybe, but that's the other part of it too. It's tuition is a result of, what does it cost for us to operate? So we have to think about our staff members, they have families, children, retirements, benefits, all of those costs go up. I mean, our energy costs have gone up so much for us to, keep the lights on, run the air conditioning and all of that. And so, unfortunately, in some instances, maybe we'll have some more generous scholarships, but I don't know that a lot of places are going to be lowering sticker price, because just the realities of where we're at right now with how much it costs to run business.
Gotcha. Interesting conversation for sure. Like, I feel like college has gotten a bad rap in the last handful of years as far as like people. Go for it, Jason.
Something I want to bring up that you reminded me of. First of all, to answer your question a long time ago, Peter, we ended up getting almost probably zero from the Pell and the state grant. But because we did the FAFSA, the school gave us a bunch of money off. So I just wanted to follow up with that. Yeah. I am a huge proponent to my children, and I recommend this if anybody listens to, why are you going to college? Are you going for the experience, or are you going because the job you want dictates you have to have a bachelor's degree? So my daughter needed obviously a bachelor's degree because she wanted to be a school teacher, and you can't do that, straight out of high school, and you have to have a certificate or a degree to get into that profession. My middle son is a welder, so I'm not going to pay for a 4-year school for him, and I don't. And then the next question to him was, do you want to go to college to get that experience? And is that worth it? And why would it be worth it to you? And then my youngest son is going to be a firefighter. And that's kind of somewhere in between, because you have experience on both sides saying you should or you shouldn't do that. So all of my kids and my friends at this point, I recommend that they, especially with the financial burden that it becomes no matter who you are, but especially as firefighters, I love to see the kids, especially the undecided kids, do the JC thing first. So maybe hit on that. What's your take on that? And do you agree, or do you think it's family specific, or the experience? How much is that worth of the first 2 years also?
Yeah. First off, Jason, I got to say, man, we got to get you on the payroll, man. Like I love your approach to this. It makes a lot of sense. I'm a little biased in that I think, regardless of what someone is going to do with their life, I never getting more education to me is always going to be a positive. I'm a big believer, regardless of what you're going to go on to do, getting a higher ed degree. Oftentimes people my undergrad was in broadcast communication. And so I'm working in higher ed. So people may come to the conclusion, oh man, that was just a waste. You're not even doing broadcasting, but absolutely not. The things that I learned in the experiences and that actually led to me getting this job, even though I'm not literally behind a radio board. I mean, I'd love to be doing what you guys are doing full time running a podcast. But, no, I think that's the right way to go about it. And, the community colleges are a great option, for a number of reasons. I mean, for some students that could be the apex, I know like Oxnard College has a great fire academy, for example. So I know there's a lot of great options. And if you want to go on to transfer to a 4-year university, it could be a great way to save a little bit of money because the fees to go to community college. But regardless, and where I think you're going with is you have to have a plan. So sometimes students, they come out of high school and they're like, oh, I don't know what I want to do, so I'm not quite ready for college, but I'm just going to go to JC for a couple years. And great if you have a plan, but if you're still kind of going there, I don't know what I'm doing, floating around, it's going to be a wasted 2 years. So I would say really get into college when you're ready and you have a plan. And for some people, that may mean you don't go to college right after you graduate. Take a gap year. There's a lot of students who do that. But I think once you get into it, you should have a plan because, again, even if you're talking about, okay, I'm only going to borrow a reasonable amount, that's still money. Even if this tuition is cheap, even if it only costs you a few $1,000s, it's still a few $1,000s. I think you should be intentional and really, I never really thought about that. Are you looking for the job or the experience? Yeah. I mean, and think about do the cost benefit analysis. I think it's a great way to look at it. And there's multiple pathways to get your degree. So at CalU, we usually shoot for about 650 or so new first year students, but then we also bring in about 185 to 200 transfers a year. So that's definitely a great option. We've got great California's got the best community college system too. So all those are great things to think about and good pathways. Just have a plan. Know what you're walking into.
Jason, I'll be a counterpoint to your point. So we're having this conversation about Emma, currently, right? She's just finished up her junior year, trying to figure out college visits, all that stuff. I'm a proponent of going away. I want her to go far away because not because I don't want her around, because I clearly want her around, but I want her to have that experience of being kind of on her own, living, away from mom and dad, more responsibility, opportunity to navigate social things. I guess it all boils down to what you're placing value on. Obviously that comes at a price for sure. It's way more expensive than just going to Ventura College, which there's nothing wrong with that. I guess I view that maybe a little bit negatively, but I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I guess just how I'm looking at it.
And I love that too. The problem is that I'm so pragmatic about everything, man. That's just my personality that I'm like, oh no, you should have great experience, go away too, but I'm not sure that I should pay for that. So that you have that discussion with your kids on how much each person is taken on with that stuff.
Yeah, it is encouraging to hear. And I've known this just from our conversations we've had that no one pays ticker price. So that's helpful. And if the average person comes out of CLU with $25K in student loan debt, that's reasonable. That's not going to screw you for the next 25 years for, if you come out with that. Yeah. Yep. So that's beneficial. Falone, what are we missing? What's key to the conversation that we haven't hit on? We're running out of time. I just want to make sure we're not going over
the only other piece, and I'll try to get it in quick because this could be a whole other topic, but I'm assuming a lot of, it's funny. My son he's a little guy. He's 10. He plays club soccer with Ventura County firefighters as father's, I think he's captain or something, but your families have kids who are into sports and athletics. And that's another thing to consider. Just really quickly, I would say that it's a great opportunity for students to get access to colleges and get recruited, and that'll open up a whole other world and a whole other things for you to think about and kick around. The big thing that I would just say is don't I mean, unless your son or daughter are really that guy or girl, there are not as many quote unquote full rides out there that people may expect. But even if your kid doesn't get a full ride, there's still some benefits to being a recruited athlete in the process that, again, I think that could be another thing. And, for many students that'll be a big part. I mean, for me, again, I went to a small university to play sports, and I didn't get an athletic scholarship, but I got enough money to make it work. And, I could have went to a state school, but they didn't have athletics. So that was the difference between me choosing my private school and not. So just another thing to think about athletics. And that's another part of the process you're going to want to start earlier than later. If your kid's not getting recruited by the middle of your senior year, it's probably not going to happen. But it's another thing to think about. Maybe a future topic, you can get someone else to talk about athletics, because that's a whole other deal. And again, I'm assuming that many of your colleagues who have kids, they are all in sports and they may be thinking about, playing in college. So that's another thing.
But what if you had without like bursting their bubble, but so the chances are pretty low that it's going to open up all the doors for you and give you a free ride to college?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it, I wish I had the statistics on hand, but it's like, even just looking at like something like football, I forget what it is, but it's like 5% of high school football players end up playing in college. And included in that 5% are like the Division IIIs, the Division IIs that give the partials. So like it's not always a golden ticket, even if they're good. I mean, a lot of things have to happen right for someone to get a full ride scholarship and get that kind of recognition. So, I would just say, think about it. Why do we all play sports? Is we want the kids to have the good experience, learn the value of teamwork. There's so much you get from athletics. Hopefully the sole motivation. I mean, again, if you have someone who's talented and you see it, then sure, that could be the motivation. But for most students, that's not what reality is going to be.
Do you get a better chance at getting more money at a smaller school like CLU maybe, or do you get a better chance at getting more money at a bigger school because they have more a bigger program for those scholarships for athletics?
Sure. It really depends. Like the money. So, for a place like Cal Lutheran, we don't offer athletic scholarships. So, there's not necessarily like a financial benefit, but for some Division III schools that may be more select, like, I worked at the Claremont colleges. That's the place that only admits 15-20%. They support athletics. We have teams to fill. So, you may have like that'll be a tip to your cap for just getting into the college or university. And then, for the bigger schools, again, for places that do have scholarships, if you're going for it, you have some opportunity. But even some Division I. So I worked at Pepperdine University, for example, fantastic women's soccer program. But only a few of those women are on full scholarships there. So like, so there is some extra money. A lot of them got partials, but it wasn't the golden ticket. And that's Division I, and they play the USCs and Virginias and all of that. So, again, it's just other things to think about. But yeah, that's, like I said, it's a whole other topic.
Yeah. But how fun to be able to play on those teams, even without the money. That's cool.
Fantastic experience. Yeah.
Falone, thank you so much for coming on. Very informative, very helpful. Hopefully our listeners get a lot out of it. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Yep. Happy to be on anytime.
All right. That was a great conversation, Jason. It's super relevant to me as I'm staring down the barrel of college educations. I remember our conversations when you were going through it. And honestly, I didn't really pay much attention as I am now. So anyway, good info.
Yeah. I was really glad to talk to him, and it kind of brought up some points that I've been, when most people who are younger than me don't really care about that stuff. And then all of a sudden, like you're saying, it's really important, and here it is. And it's a huge amount of money. And I remember looking at those sticker prices and going, there is no way we're going to do this. So I'm glad to get some of that education out there. I did want to clarify one thing that I said. I told you that I took out some private loans for my daughter. And one of the things we realized is some of the Fannie Mae products for the loans actually had a higher interest rate than some of the private loans. And that's why we ended up doing that. So it could have been all Fannie Mae type stuff, but they were like at 8 and 9% back when the private loans were like at 4 and 5. So anyway, that's why we ended up doing that.
Yeah, I'm stoked that no one pays sticker price because the stickers are intimidating. But yeah, I think good information will definitely have all the parents who are coming of age, hopefully listening to this podcast. And let's see, a little bit of housekeeping. We got the stair climb coming up on September 9th. All the info's on the website. Definitely go there and sign up if you're so inclined. What else, Jason?
Yeah, you could climb on that thing. You could be a sponsor. I think the pipe band's going to end up playing there. So it should be a really fun day. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for another great episode, and until next time.
Take care.